All right, excellent. So, good morning, Mitch. We've talked a lot about cybersecurity lately. It's an issue for all governments, Canadian. I mean, globally, it's an issue.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
we've talked about getting on some experts when there's something topical going on in America or across the world pertaining to cyber. And I'm pleased to introduce James Cooper, Chief Technologist for HP Services today, who's joining us, who's going to provide some insight on cybersecurity and just a little bit of background on James, or or nicknamed Coop, I should say. He's a 35-year veteran of the service industry, including manufacturing, high performance compute, data center, consulting, IT, and most recently, workplace services. He's a self-described technology evangelist advocating the need for change and is an inventor with 5 patents and others pending. Coop hosts Today and Tomorrow, a vlog series on LinkedIn, and has mentored 20 Masters of Information Services capstone projects. In addition to his role with HP, he also sits on the Microsoft Modern Desktop Advisory Council. And I got to say, like, in interviewing many cyber experts, many technology experts in general, I find that when we approach it with just solid questions and like rehearsed answers, it's we don't really get the value from these experts. So,
Yeah.
In leading up to this, we were very clear with Coop, please feel free to kind of expand on details and not to be shy, because I think that's where our audience gets most of the value from.
Yeah, pull out his 35 years of experience and get his opinions on some of the things in the news right now and where things are going, what's happening right now, what's topical. So let's introduce Coop.
Yeah, Coop.
Hey, thanks a lot. Glad to be here, guys. I mean, this is a tremendous opportunity to get to chat with you about some of the issues at hand in workplace and beyond workplace. Cyber is every IT, CISO, CIO, CEO's nightmare. And we've had a few events in probably the past year that are noteworthy, and there's probably a few events that we'll never know about.
Hey, Coop, before we jump right into it, could you tell us a little bit about these inventions you're working on and have worked on, and a little bit about your blog as well?
Yeah. So as far as inventions go, a lot of the work that I've done is with HP Labs around just a different experience in the future. I think a lot of us, it's really coming to fruition now with the COVID, but we've done a lot of work in the past on ideas around how do people be a person, but yet interact with their family, maybe interact with volunteer work, interact with their corporate work. And certainly if you're a consultant, it becomes multiple corporations that you're engaged with. And so a lot of work around these inventions were how to enable multiple experiences from a single device. And then some of the other patents that I've worked on is about how to do governance and classification of content, which is a really big issue, especially in the work from home world of, hey, all this corporate content is outside the corporate firewall. What do we do? And there's some really cool work that, Google and Microsoft Quest has done in the past. And then there's things that are really hard to classify. And being that HP has got a print company and an imaging company go with that, we've actually worked on some ideas on how to go beyond the standard set of content, textual types of content, and being able to identify and classify content based upon sensitivity. And then the final area that we've done some work on is in the area of collaboration, which once again, this past year, everyone was saying, hey, why couldn't we've had a product to do this? Is the whole notion of being able to collaborate across the analog digital divide. Specifically, the problem we were trying to solve a few years back was at HP, other large corporations, it was always painful to book a conference room more than 4 hours at a time. So how do you take all the analog Post-it notes, whiteboard, flip charts, and be able to reset that up in another room? And so we worked on an idea to capture the analog, re-represent it in digital, And of course, that could be extended to conference room A to conference room B. And now with the work that's going on with either Microsoft, I would like to point out HP also with the OmniCep technology, but we're getting really good at immersive experiences. And so bringing all that together, how can you sit at home and actually have an experience as if you're in a conference room? Is an area that near and dear to my heart, as well as some ideas around security. We have filed some in the pending category of how to do protection of sensitive content whenever you're working from home. And so hopefully those will see a light of day in a product in the future.
And, during the pandemic, and I mean, after the pandemic, in Canada, I think we're about 2 months behind the United States. We're still getting vaccinated. We're not going to rock concerts like in the States at the moment. I guess I got two questions for you. Like, do you find that the changes that have occurred during the pandemic in the States, do you find them sticky in terms of like people working from home and a hybrid workforce going forward? And do you feel like, where do you see that, after everything we've learned the past few months or year now with the pandemic, how do you see the world shaping up and changing because of it, going forward?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of industries that obviously do not lend themselves for working home. You can think about building a car. While I would love to have time to work on building maybe a classic car, probably I'm not going to be manufacturing cars in my garage anytime soon. So, workforce in manufacturing, any type of, resort, hospitality industry, it's really hard to always have meals at home versus wanting to go out and maybe enjoy a different cuisine. And so it's really hard for the chef at my local favorite restaurant to cook it at home and get it to me. So we can take those off the table. I think we all would agree that we really need the people to return to work. We need those businesses to be successful. I don't know about where you're at, but we had, I would say, probably nearly 30% of our local restaurants. And being in a college town, having lots of different cuisines, it's really, really devastating to go by one of my favorite restaurants and see, close, permanently, never to reopen again. So we lost some really good restaurants during the pandemic. But now let's sort of pivot to probably like the work that you and I do. And where is that going to go in the future? And I think that largely it's going to be a significant change on when do you travel, when do you go to the office? And I think it's going to be more purposeful in the future rather than just go to have a meeting face to face. Now, I think that we all are psychologically fatigued with the whole Zoom meetings and Zoom face to face, going to team meetings across 10 time zones, and having somebody in their pajamas and somebody really wanting to go and play sports with their kids. Very challenging in those events. So will we just stay in the Zoom world, or will we actually take some of those staff meetings and do face to face? Maybe we do it every other month or every other quarter. And then we get to the regular office workers, people that are doing data entry, maybe support. Do those people really need to be in the office? I think a lot of times the answer was always no. We had lots of airlines that actually engaged staff to do reservations without ever coming to the office. And that was for a variety of reasons. A lot of it was to balance work life and being able to work at home and take care of, maybe parents or kids or other things. Do we really need them to be in a call center to have somebody, with the whip, you're saying, you got to do this, you got to do this, your call volume is down, you need to do this. I think a lot of that we're comfortable with leaving that at home, reducing the square footage, improving margins. And I think that there's other areas where having people do collaboration together on a periodic basis is probably going to be valuable. People want to get back. We're humans. Humans are social. 2D representation, like what we're doing right now, is really hard to get all the body language via Zoom. And so ultimately, I think that many people will never go back to the office. I think a lot of people will go to offices for very specific purposes or doing research, running some type of a simulation in the lab, et cetera. But it has changed, and I don't see us going back to building huge luxury-enabled office buildings in the future or anytime soon, just because of everything we've learned. And of course, sustainability comes into play here too. Think about all the reduction in emissions over the past year by people just not driving nearly as much. And I try to catch the news in the morning, and you guys might too. And here locally, our news is always talking about the traffic. And the last time I recall any of the motorways showing anything other than green, and the average speed being above the actual posted speed limit, it's been over a year. I mean, it's been green, 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 unless there was an accident during the middle of the winter or something. So there's not really any impact to traffic. So maybe those traffic engineers have, maybe we'll have to look for something different in the future with the reduction of cars on the motorways.
For sure. And I think you brought up some really good points, especially with regard to the shift in terms of what the future will look like in terms of people working at home versus working in the office. Now, how do you think the pandemic has really reshaped the way that people think of cybersecurity? Because obviously with people working at home, it brings up new challenges, new avenues, and I think it's going to produce really interesting challenges for companies and for the government.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is where a lot of the oh my came in with many IT organizations a year ago was, hey, we designed all of our manageability, our security control enforcements, all of our security policies, maybe even our malware detection, all was built under the assumption that devices were connected to the corporate network. And nobody ever thought about having 100% of devices being remote. So we instantly saw, oh my, we got to increase the VPN capacity. And so a lot of organizations did that. That gets to be really expensive whenever you start thinking about updating operating systems, things like Windows and other operating systems. But we can pick on our friends at Microsoft about every month. There's always Patch Tuesday, a new quality update for Windows 10, and a couple times a year we get features update, which is cool. But on the flip side, there's no way to really push that cost effectively out over the VPN. And so we have to think differently. Security controls, enforcement of security controls, whenever you were thinking in the old school about group policies and device having to see the Active Directory controller, we had an issue. Customers who were in the throes of going towards modern management, there's a lot of governments around the world that actually had started on this a couple of years ago on, hey, we know that it's people travel, people work from home. We need an over the internet mechanism to make sure devices are in compliance and people aren't getting off of campus and doing things that they shouldn't be doing with their corporate owned devices. And so those companies were actually in a much better position. They were, they had to do a lot of hurry up and wait. Than companies where everything assumed it was inside the castle, including notebooks and desktops. So that's, I think, a really big challenge. I think the next challenge is, I don't know that it will continue with the pandemic, but the number of people who went home, all my kids are grown, so it didn't impact me. It might have impacted you, but all of a sudden you're at home. Kids need a notebook. And what is the priority for a parent? Priority is, I will always sacrifice my work to enable my children's education. And so all of a sudden we saw a bunch of corporate notebooks being used for education. And that was a huge issue that could compromise the security of content, especially if somebody was at a higher level in a company and this would happen. Or if you were an engineer and exposed to sensitive ideas for the next invention or even more of a proprietary trade secret type of a deal. So leakage of data accidentally to family members became a very, very significant issue. Hopefully that's all going to work its way out with work from home. I think we'll start seeing more and more people have notebooks at home. Kids have notebooks at home to be able to interact with information. But and then I think the final area that became an issue is people just doing things without thinking about it, whether clicking on an email link or storing corporate information. Hey, the sky is falling. I've got a network storage unit at home. Let me store and synchronize all my corporate files to my network storage because the sky is falling with network bandwidth and everything. And all of a sudden, corporations lost line of sight to sensitive data, especially if the data was not protected in some form or fashion, i.e. the actual files encrypted versus the disk drive being encrypted. And so all of a sudden, corporations started having a huge issue around data loss.
And Coop, so I mean, you're bang on. I mean, just when the pandemic was hitting, the entire government of Canada basically switched to working from home overnight. They were not set up for it, so it was a bit of a challenge to get going. And of course, everyone now is working from their notebooks or laptops, and a variety of them, right? They're not all using the same devices. So could you talk a little bit about the vulnerability from an end user perspective? You kind of touched on it, but like, what should governments and companies think about if they're using different laptops and whatnot? How can they protect their end users?
Yeah, I think that the very first thing that we should really bring up, it's sort of been the elephant in the room for a decade, and that is the number of attacks on the actual hardware. You're starting to see Microsoft, the last time you probably logged onto Facebook or LinkedIn or any social media, they're really pushing their secure core PC. Which at HP we want to say, hey, welcome to the game, because HP actually addressed firmware compromise, firmware malware a decade ago, and putting some technology into our devices. But at the end of the day, the industry has got to do a better job of protecting and educating the user of the actual hardware, independent of the operating system. A good thing about open source, and a bad thing about open source is every notebook, whether you're a Mac, a Chromebook, Linux, Windows, we're all using the same UEFI for starting up machines. And so if there's a vulnerability on one machine, it's going to be there on all machines. So if a device, a secure core device, or an HP SureStart device is attacked, they can recover, but everything else in your environment has probably been compromised, and your malware and your AV will never, ever be able to detect that. So that's probably item number one. And then item number two is just user education. I think we did talk about this. I don't have any notes in front of it, but in the pre-talk is educate, 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 and educate. There is no universal all malware, all AV, all potential attack vectors will ever be addressed. There will be always somebody somewhere figure out something. The last item that I saw was a particular font set. The A looks exceedingly like an O. And so whenever you go fishing, you teach people how to hover over the link to make sure that it really is. So maybe it's, bank.com, and all of a sudden this little O isn't really an O, it's actually something else, but visually. So how do we educate people for checking fonts now to make sure that they're not being phished? But social responsibility for the cyber attacks on corporations is something that we have to get a whole lot better at. AV malware, hardware containers, software containers, OS containers. HP's got some pretty interesting technology that we acquired a couple of years ago. But all of these together, really, 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 the ultimate asset is the end user. And then we can talk about, is it all about technology, right? We could say, well, a very, very scrupulous person might actually, in the old days we call it dumpster diving, and I meet you. Maybe we meet in person sometime or another, and we develop a rapport. And I send you an email, and you think, oh, that's from Coop, and then all of a sudden, Coop's a bad guy. Coop manipulated me socially, and so we have to be very, very aware of our surroundings, whether it's human interaction leading to a purported friendship, or emails that look like they're from a friend, or emails that look like they're from our bank, et cetera, because they all lead to bad things. And we need to really, really zero in on trying to make those a lot less invasive in the future.
And Coop, does that have to, we talk a lot about zero trust policy. And does that, like your point there at the end there, where, you develop a rapport with me, I'm expecting an email from Coop, and then suddenly, you're not who I think you are, is that what zero trust policy ties into? Is that what it means?
Absolutely. And we can go through the example about Coop manipulating. So, I send a link and you click and authenticate to a site. Now, all of a sudden, if we think about zero trust, and let's say it's a bank or a government agency or school or maybe your corporation, once they start acting on zero trust, it's like, hey, if you're expecting to have a multi-factor or present some other form of identity for either your system or yourself, then a lot of the phishing goes away, because now all of a sudden your identity and the mechanism for authenticating that second factor would not work at blah blah .c with a funky A that looks like an OM organization. So it's an education, but it's also a policy. We need to start being very, very serious about doing zero trust. I don't want to trust the device. I don't want to trust the user until additional credentials are met. Your compliance of your device being with my policy, compliance of applications. We're starting to see, especially with work from home, the notion of compliant applications and being able to set security controls on the application rather than the device. So that's probably will happen more and more frequently in the future, is, whether it's a SaaS application or an actually installed applications on Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux, and a few other operating systems, that they will become very, very self-aware and actually have security controls built into the application to trigger this idea of zero trust.
Yeah, so just building off of that, I think one of the things that we've kind of touched on a little bit is there's all these different options for cybersecurity, and at least in our experience, we've seen a bit of an arms race in terms of cybersecurity. So, in your own experience and over your dealing with different governments and everything, what tactics can governments use to enhance their cybersecurity? Is there a government per se that you've seen that's doing a really good job with their policies, with things that they've installed, or is there nobody doing it right now and it's evolved too fast to keep up, kind of thing? So, it would be love to get your opinion.
And when we deal with governments, we do have, every government has certain agencies that has to have, by definition, very, very, very rigorous and invasive types of security. I think the governments that are getting people's attention are those that say, hey, here is a set of security policies, here's a set of controls, here's a set of what we think you should install, or maybe it's a variety of AVs or a variety of this or that, and making it such that users are not on a mission to usurp the controls. Once security controls become invasive, people will spend more time trying to figure out how to get around the security control than the security control provides the value for. So we just need to understand that there's a balance point between secure and unsecure. We could say, hey, you can have a notebook, but you can never connect it to the network. And not only that, you have to be in a safe secure room to even power up the unit because, hey, it radiates and somebody might be able to capture your keystrokes. We probably all don't want to work in a safe. We probably all would like to have access to internet to get to email or do Zoom calls, etc. So how do we do that in a very, very efficient, non-intrusive manner, but actually protect content is sort of that balance point. You can look at, there's several governments. The UK actually publishes their security policies. Any citizen, actually anybody on the planet can go out and look at the UK recommendations. So I think that's a great example. We can debate on the actual control and whether it's a good control or a bad control for a particular situation, but governments are actually engaging their citizens on how to reduce the impact of cyber attacks. I think those are the governments that we ought to look at for suggestions and better experiences.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, Canada at least is influenced heavily by the UK. The Canadian Cyber Center, I believe, was based on the UK model. But also, I think Canadians are also looking anxiously at the United States in terms of what the US is up to. And that kind of pertains to the last question, in which I really want to get, Coop's expertise on, because like years and years of operating in the cyber world, is the attack on the Colonial Pipeline in the States. And for the listeners that aren't completely familiar with it, in early May, there was a ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline. This pipeline brings, jet fuel and just, gas and whatnot to the eastern seaboard. And the ransomware attack happened. It shut down the pipeline. The company ended up paying some of the ransom and eventually reestablished the connection. But it prompted President Joe Biden and also many states to declare a state of emergency. And some folks might have also seen some people kind of freaking out about it and hoarding gas. So really, this simple act really almost brought, a good component of the United States to a screeching halt. So Coop, ransomware seems to be a tactic used often by perpetrators. So what is your take on this attack? Has it changed? Is it a bit of a wake-up call? Clearly it prompted some action from the U.S. administration. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so I think that there are things that individuals, once again, can use to mitigate some risk of ransomware. You can look at any of the, what we call file store and sync, the OneDrives, the Google Drives, the boxes, Dropboxes. So a few hundred of them out there now. And almost all of them actually allow point-in-time recovery. So the average citizen who might someday see that ransomware pop up, if they have been really good about using some type of file store and sync, their risk can be mitigated. It's not eliminated, but it can be mitigated as far as, family pictures, maybe it's a book report if you're a kid or whatever, from being compromised. The bigger issue, and not to understate the issue, whenever we talk about hospitals, there's been a number of hospitals, the Colonial Pipeline, of taking entire businesses. Most of those are ransomware of servers and impact operations immediately. If you're in the hospital and you're in the operating room, you really don't want the entire hospital system to be taken offline because of ransomware. And certainly in the U.S., we love bad news. Sometimes we joke about the our weathermen and stores in cahoots with each other on, oh my, that's going to be the mega storm of the century. You need to go to the store and stock up, and then all of a sudden you go to the store and the shelves are empty. So and then unfortunately it's sort of the cry wolf. Nothing happens, but. This whole cry wolf situation with people hoarding gas was quite unfortunate, because it does impact people who need to go from point A to point B. Ultimately, I think there's some really good things that came out of this from a policy point of view. You got to remember, we had SolarWinds, we had on-premise Exchange servers that were impacted, and then the whole notion with Colonial Pipeline. So all these together in the span of a few months actually drove the government to take some actions, and I think probably bring the U.S. up to parity with some policies out of Europe. Is like, hey, you have to share attacks. If your organization has been attacked, it's no longer an option to keep that hidden, and you have to inform the government of that. Sharing attack information will probably be really difficult for some U.S. organizations to embrace. But at the end of the day, mandating that you have to share attack information will make the industry, make the whole world a safer place if we all know that this location on the planet is a source of cyber attacks, and we can start blocking that. We can take actions on network traffic. We can do abatements and threat mitigations and operating systems, et cetera, if we all start sharing the information and saying, hey, I don't want to ever tell anybody that I got a ransomware. We got to get past I don't want to share this information because it makes me, I'll be embarrassed if I tell somebody. It's sort of like getting a traffic ticket. Do you how many people, I was caught speeding, So we got to get past that and share that information together to make our whole cyber network and our whole cyber experience a lot more resilient. And I think that, we'll see more and more techniques on, whether it's a honeypot or other areas to try to draw bad people to experiment and do bad things in a simulated environment rather than in a physical environment. So if you stop and think about where we're at with virtualization, cloud types of events, we can do a pretty good job of simulating entire businesses. And we can sort of put the lights up and say open for attack and see if we can get bad people to attack virtual businesses rather than physical businesses.
Yeah, and this cybersecurity and these issues will certainly not go away. In fact, they probably will just speed up. And Coop, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but it makes me wonder or look back at the Stone Age, and life was so much simpler back then. When they didn't have to worry about this stuff.
Yeah, all I had to worry about was the bear and the lion trying to eat you before you could find dinner, right? I mean, that's at one level absolutely true. At different levels, there were other threats at that point in time. But as networks get faster, as we advance technology, it's just going to keep on increasing. So we should not put our guard down. And I think that that's the reason, at the beginning of this, I said educate, educate, educate. I don't know that application developers, network operators, operating system developers, patch developers can move faster than bad people.
That's an excellent point. And, it reminds me when I first joined the firm I'm at now, they were doing these test phishing attacks to see if they would catch me. And they caught me a couple times. I click a link and next thing you know, it says, you got caught, haha, we got you. But now I catch them now, so, to your point about education, you can teach someone even like me, to avoid, those wrongdoings and whatnot. So James Coop, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah,
it was a real pleasure.
Absolutely. I had fun. I hope to come back again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Coop.
Great.
Bye.